Lorraine, France. September 19th, 1944, 0600 hours. The fog is so thick a man cannot see his own hands on the controls. Somewhere in that grey silence, 500 yards east of the small French town of Harcourt, a young American lieutenant sits inside a machine that should not exist. His name is Edwin H. Leiper. He is a platoon commander in Company C, 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, and the vehicle he commands has less steel between his body and a German shell than the door of a Buick sedan. 12.7 millimeters on the sides, 12.7 millimeters on the rear, 25.4 millimeters at the very front. The thickest armor on the entire vehicle, less than an inch of steel. For comparison, the German Panther tanks now moving through the fog toward him carry 80 millimeters of sloped armor across their frontal glacis, enough to defeat most Allied guns at combat range. The Panther weighs 45 tons. Leiper's vehicle weighs 17.5. The Panther has been designed by the finest engineers in the Third Reich, at the Krupp Works, at MAN, at Daimler-Benz, with the accumulated wisdom of 5 years of armored warfare on the Eastern Front. Leiper's vehicle has been designed by a Michigan automobile company that spent the last 40 years making luxury sedans for American doctors and dentists. In the next 25 minutes, on this fog-blind ridge, that Michigan automobile is going to kill 5 Panthers. By the end of the 11-day battle that begins this morning, its battalion will destroy 39 German armored vehicles at a cost of 3 of its own. And by the end of the war, the vehicle Lieutenant Leiper is sitting inside will hold the highest kill ratio of any American armored vehicle in the European theater. More Panthers per Hellcat lost than any Sherman, more than any Wolverine, more than any Jackson, built by a company that made Buicks. Armored with paper. This is the story of how that happened, and of why the men who created it never fully understood what they had built. 3 years earlier, 1941, Washington, D.C., the office of Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, Commanding General, Army Ground Forces, 58 years old, West Point, class of 1904, artilleryman by training, architect of the American Ground Army by assignment. McNair has a problem, and the problem has a name, Blitzkrieg. In September 1939, German armor drove through Poland in 5 weeks. In May 1940, it drove through France in 6. Everywhere the Wehrmacht committed massed panzer formations, defensive lines that had been considered secure collapsed within days. American observers who studied these campaigns reached a conclusion that McNair took very seriously. If the German army ever attacked the American army in a European theater, the same thing might happen. McNair's job was to prevent it. His answer was a doctrine, not a weapon, not a formation, a concept put on paper that would organize how the American army thought about the problem of armored breakthrough. The doctrine was called Tank Destroyer Doctrine. It said the following: tanks would not fight tanks. Tanks would exploit breakthroughs. The job of stopping enemy armor would go to a separate specialized force, fast, mobile, lightly armored, positioned in reserve, committed to threaten sectors before the enemy could turn a penetration into a rupture. The motto McNair approved for this new force was 3 words long: seek, strike, destroy. To command it, he needed a man who believed in the concept as completely as he did. He found Major General Andrew Davis Bruce. Bruce was 50 years old in 1944, Texas-born, West Point class of 1916. Infantry officer in the First World War, staff officer through the interwar years, career soldier. He had never commanded a tank in combat. He had never commanded a tank destroyer in combat. He had never, in fact, personally observed an armored engagement of any kind. Everything he knew about armored warfare had come from intelligence reports, from German after-action documents translated by Army intelligence, from summaries of what British observers had seen in the Western Desert, from maps and diagrams and photographs of burning tanks in Polish wheat fields taken by Wehrmacht propaganda companies and captured after the war began. This was the man McNair placed in charge of the entire American tank destroyer force. The Tank Destroyer Center opened at Camp Hood, Texas, in 1942. Over the next 3 years, more than 100,000 American soldiers would pass through it. They would learn a doctrine written by a general who had never fired a tank round at a moving target, and they would be sent to fight the German army with it. The first test came in February 1943, Kasserine Pass. Tunisia. Rommel's Afrika Korps came through the pass with a combined arms force built around veteran panzer crews. The American tank destroyer units in their path were equipped with the M6 gun motor carriage, a 37mm anti-tank gun bolted to a 3/4-ton truck, and the M3 half-track, which carried a 75mm gun on an open-topped tracked vehicle, whose sides offered less protection than a farm wagon. The 37mm round struck the frontal armour of the Panzer IV and bounced. The 75mm round from the half-track could penetrate, but the half-track could not survive being seen. German gunners located the American positions within minutes of the first engagement and destroyed them with methodical precision. The tank destroyer force that was supposed to stop German armoured breakthrough at Kasserine Pass did not stop it. The Germans pushed 30 miles into the American rear before the combination of British armour, American artillery, and terrain that channeled the advance into defensible positions finally halted them. McNair's doctrine had been tested in its first serious engagement. It had failed. The response from the Tank Destroyer Command was not to reconsider the doctrine. It was to demand better vehicles. The M10 Wolverine came first. Built on the chassis of the M4 Sherman, 3-inch gun in an open-topped rotating turret. Adequate armour, by tank destroyer standards. Reliable, because it shared parts with the Sherman. Bruce studied the M10's specifications and reached a conclusion that would shape everything that followed. 30 miles per hour, that was the M10's road speed. A Panther in September 1944 could manage 28. The margin was 2 miles per hour. 2 miles per hour, on a paved road, in ideal conditions, was not a doctrine. It was a coincidence. The M10 could not reach a threatened sector faster than the German armour, exploiting a breakthrough, could reach the same sector from the other direction. The whole purpose of the tank destroyer, the reason it existed as a separate force, with a separate motto and a separate command, was to be somewhere before the crisis was. The M10 could not do that. Bruce wanted 50 miles per hour. He wanted a vehicle that could be positioned 10 miles behind the front and still arrive before German panzers could consolidate a penetration. He wanted a vehicle that could disengage from an unfavourable position faster than the enemy could pursue. He wanted, in short, a tracked armoured vehicle that behaved like a sports car. The engineers at Ordnance Department told him what he was asking for could not be built. Not at 50 miles per hour. Not while carrying a 76mm gun. Not while carrying enough armour to stop a rifle round. Bruce told them to build it anyway. The contract went to Buick Motor Division of General Motors, Flint, Michigan, a company that had spent the previous 4 decades making the Roadmaster, the Century, the Special, and the Limited. Automobiles with chromed grills and leather seats and straight-8 engines that hummed at highway speed with the smoothness that made Buick one of the premium brands in American motoring. Now Buick would build a weapon. The engineers in Flint faced a physics problem that had no clean solution. They needed 60 miles per hour on a tracked vehicle. They needed a 76mm gun in a rotating turret. They needed a crew of 5 and enough fuel to reach the fight. And the total weight had to stay under 18 tons, or the vehicle would not accelerate the way Bruce demanded. Every pound of armour added was a pound of performance removed. The solution came in 3 pieces. The first was the engine. A Wright R975 radial, 9 cylinders arranged in a star, air-cooled, 400 horsepower. This was the same engine that powered the M4 Sherman. But the Wright R975 had not been designed for tanks. It had been designed 20 years earlier for airplanes, for the Curtiss Robin, the Stinson Detroiter, the small civilian aircraft of the interwar years. Buick's engineers took an aircraft engine from the age of Lindbergh and dropped it into a tank designed to kill Panthers. In the Sherman, that engine had to move 33 tons. It managed 25 miles per hour. In the vehicle Buick was building, the same engine would move 17.5 tons. Almost exactly half the weight. Same engine, same horsepower, same fuel. 2 completely different machines. The second piece was the suspension. The Sherman used vertical volute suspension. Robust, well-proven, heavy. Buick replaced it with torsion bar suspension, a system where a long steel rod ran laterally through the hull, twisting under load, springing back as the road wheel came up. Lighter, smoother, faster. The third piece was the transmission. The Torquematic 900T, an automatic transmission that let the driver focus on the road instead of the gearbox. No clutch, no double declutching under fire. In a vehicle whose survival depended on changing direction faster than the enemy could aim, that mattered more than any single ballistic advantage. In April 1943, at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, the prototype went out onto the test track for its acceptance trial. The specification called for 60 miles per hour. It hit 60 miles per hour. The test driver climbed down, took his helmet off, and used a word that no one had ever previously used to describe a tracked armored vehicle. He said it felt light. The name that stuck came from someone inside the Buick plant, a word that meant something fast and mean and difficult to catch. Hellcat. The men who would eventually take the Hellcat into combat arrived at Camp Hood in waves through 1943 and 1944. They were, for the most part, young, 19 years old, 20, 22, drafted or enlisted, farm boys from Iowa, city boys from Newark, sons of coal miners in West Virginia and sons of grocers in Brooklyn. They came to Texas because the Army had decided that Texas was where the tank destroyer force would be born, and once they arrived, they were taught a doctrine none of them had helped write. The doctrine said this: your armor will not save you, your speed will save you. Fire from a position the enemy has not located. Move before the return fire arrives. Never stay where you have just fired from. The vehicle you are inside can outrun any tank in the German army. Use that. Some of the men asked about the open turret. They were told the open turret was a design feature. It saved weight, and a vehicle that was never in one place long enough to be accurately targeted did not need overhead protection because artillery airburst and small arms fire were threats a correctly employed tank destroyer would avoid by constant movement. Some of the men asked about the 12.7 millimeters of side armor. They were told the same thing in slightly different words. You will not be there when he fires. The men learnt the doctrine. They learnt the vehicle. They learnt the tactics. They passed through Camp Hood, and they boarded ships, and they crossed the Atlantic, and they landed in North Africa and Italy and France. And by the summer of 1944, the moment was coming when the doctrine would meet the enemy for the first time in the form the Tank Destroyer Command had designed it to meet him. Not in the flat sand of the Tunisian's desert with an obsolete gun on a 3/4-ton truck, but at 60 miles per hour on the roads of Europe in a purpose-built machine designed to prove that speed was armor and armor was optional, or if the doctrine was wrong, to prove the opposite. The fog was still 8 weeks away. Anzio, Italy, May 1944. The Hellcats' war begins here. Company C of the 636th Tank Destroyer Battalion has been on the beachhead for 4 months. 4 months of shellfire from the Alban Hills that never really stops. 4 months of watching men die in ways the Army training films never mentioned. The doctrine that was taught at Camp Hood, the doctrine of speed and movement and choosing when and where you fight, has met the reality of a beachhead where there is no room to move, no unfired position to reach, no unregistered ground to occupy. Anzio is a rectangle 7 miles deep and 15 miles wide. Every square foot of it is on some German gunner's map. The Hellcats arrive in April. The crews are told what the crews at Camp Hood were told. Your speed will save you. Fire and move, never stay. Within 20 minutes of the first serious engagement, 3 Hellcats of Company C are burning on a road outside Cisterna. The rounds that kill them are not tank rounds. They are machine gun rounds. A German MG-42 with armor-piercing ammunition at close range has cut through the 12.7 millimeters of hull side as if it were tin plate. The crews inside had no warning. The doctrine had not prepared them for the idea that a weapon a man could carry on his shoulder could kill the vehicle he was riding inside. The survivors that night begin to do something that no manual authorized. They start filling sandbags. They stack them along the hull sides, 3 deep, sometimes 4. They tie them to the fenders with signal wire. They pile them on the glacis plate. In the fading Italian light, the Hellcats begin to look less like weapons and more like earthworks on tracks. The order comes down within a week. The sandbags will be removed. The Tank Destroyer Command in the rear has determined that the additional weight reduces the vehicle's top speed. The doctrine states that speed is the primary survival mechanism. Any modification that reduces speed is therefore a modification that reduces survival, regardless of what the men inside the vehicle believe. The men inside the vehicle are ordered to choose between the doctrine and the sandbags. The doctrine wins, not because the men are convinced, because they are soldiers, and the order comes from officers with more stars than they have, and in the American Army in 1944, that is how the argument ends. The sandbags come off. Some of the crews put them back on the moment their officers stop watching. June 1944. Normandy. The Hellcat crosses into France a few weeks after D-Day and drives directly into terrain that its designers had never imagined. The Norman bocage. Hedgerows built by farmers over centuries, walls of packed earth and root systems, 6 feet high, 10 feet thick, topped with tangled trees that block observation completely. Every field is a fortress. Every gap between fields is a killing ground. Every road is a corridor with hedgerows on both sides that no vehicle can see past. The 60 miles per hour that Bruce demanded, the 60 miles per hour that the engineers at Buick spent 2 years achieving, is meaningless here. A Hellcat in the bocage does not reach 20 miles per hour. It cannot. It has to slow at every hedgerow gap, at every road junction, at every point where the German gunners have almost certainly zeroed a Panzerfaust or an anti-tank gun. The tactic of appearing from an unexpected direction is impossible when there are only 3 directions the vehicle can approach from, and all 3 are covered by German fire. The men who came out of Camp Hood expecting to fight at 60 miles per hour discover that the war they are actually fighting is at 4. The 76mm gun works, in the sense that when a Hellcat manages to get a shot at a Panzer IV from the flank at short range, the round penetrates and the German tank burns. That works. Almost nothing else about the doctrine works in Normandy. July 25, 1944. Operation Cobra begins with the largest single application of American air power in the history of the ground war to that point. 1,500 heavy bombers of the 8th Air Force are to strike a rectangular target area near Saint-Lô. The plan is to open a gap in the German line wide enough for Bradley's First Army to drive through and turn the summer of stalemate into a summer of movement. Lieutenant General Leslie McNair is in Normandy that morning. He has flown over from England to observe the operation personally. He wants to see the doctrine work. He wants to see the American Army do to the Germans in France what the Germans did to the French in 1940. Fast, coordinated, devastating. He is standing in a forward observation position when the bombers arrive. Some of them are early. Some of them have misidentified the smoke that marks the target line. Some of them are simply wrong, at high altitude, in cloud, at the end of a long flight from England. The bombs fall short. They fall on the American positions the doctrine was written to protect. They fall on Leslie McNair. He is killed instantly. The highest-ranking American officer to die in the European theatre of the Second World War, killed by American bombs, dropped by American planes. In the middle of the operation, he had flown across the Channel to watch succeed. The architect of the tank destroyer doctrine does not live to see it vindicated. 2 months from now, on a fog-blind ridge in Lorraine, a young lieutenant named Edwin Leiper will do something that would have made the old general very quiet and very proud if he had lived to see it. But McNair is dead, and the machine he built the doctrine around is about to have its moment without him. Operation Cobra breaks the line open. Patton's Third Army pours through the gap, 500 kilometers in 26 days, across Brittany, across the Loire, across France in a summer of movement that vindicates every argument the Tank Destroyer Command had ever made about mobility and speed. And then, in early September 1944, 300 miles from where it started, Patton's Third Army runs out of gasoline. The tanks stop. The Hellcats stop. The war of movement, the war the doctrine had planned for, ends not because the Germans have stopped it, but because the supply chain cannot keep up. Fuel is going to Bradley in the north. Fuel is going to Montgomery further north still. Fuel is going to Market Garden, the airborne operation that will fail at Arnhem later that month. Patton's Third Army sits in Lorraine and waits. And 200 miles to the east, in a headquarters in Germany, a 47-year-old Prussian general named Hasso von Manteuffel receives an order from Adolf Hitler. Retake Lorraine, push the Americans back before they can consolidate their positions and reach the West Wall fortifications on the German border. Manteuffel is given the 5th Panzer Army, and the 5th Panzer Army, in September 1944, is being reinforced by 2 brand-new formations that Hitler has personally ordered into existence to stop the American advance. The 111th Panzer Brigade, the 113th Panzer Brigade, new Panthers, straight from the factory at MAN and Daimler-Benz, the Ausf. G model, the finest production Panther of the war, 80 mm of sloped frontal armor, a 75 mm Kabuki 42 long-barreled gun that can defeat the front of any Allied tank at 1800 meters. But the crews. The crews are not veterans. Most of them received their Panthers less than 4 weeks ago. Many have never operated a tracked vehicle heavier than a truck. The gunners have fired the K-42 in practice on stationary targets, in daylight, in Germany. They have not fired it in combat. Not one of them has ever seen an American tank destroyer. Hitler has ordered the offensive to begin September 19. Manteuffel has asked for more time. Hitler has refused. Haraucourt, France, September 19, 1944, 0600 hours. The fog comes down overnight and does not lift. Visibility, on the ridges north and east of Haraucourt, is less than 150 yards. In the low ground it is less than 50. The fighter bombers of the 19th Tactical Air Command that have been killing German armor throughout the summer are grounded. The German attack that Manteuffel would not have chosen to launch in these conditions has been launched anyway, on Hitler's schedule, because Hitler does not know the difference between clear weather and fog and does not care. The 113th Panzer Brigade is moving through the fog toward Haraucourt. The Americans defending Haraucourt are elements of the 4th Armored Division, one of the leading formations of Patton's 3rd Army. Attached to the 4th Armored for the Lorraine operation is the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18 Hellcats. Company C, 704th, is positioned on a ridge that in normal conditions would command every road the Germans could use to approach the town. In the fog, the commanding view is worth nothing. The commander of a platoon in Company C is 1st Lieutenant Edwin H. Leiper. He has positioned his Hellcats hull down behind the reverse slope of the ridge. Only the turrets are exposed. The hulls, the thin ones, the 12.7 mm ones, are protected by the earth itself. His orders to his crews are simple. Hold your fire until you can identify the target. Do not engage until the range closes. Move immediately after firing. At approximately 0620, Leiper sees the muzzle of a Panther emerging from the fog at a range that later analysis will estimate at 150 yards. He fires first. The 76 mm round strikes the Panther at an angle that presents its side armor. The armor is 50 mm thick at that point on the hull. The round penetrates. The Panther burns. The ammunition inside the tank begins to cook off in a series of secondary explosions that light the fog from within, creating a column of flame and smoke visible for 300 yards in every direction. The burning Panther is now simultaneously a marker of the German column's position and an obstacle to the German column's ability to see what has just killed one of their number. Leiper moves. 30 yards to the left, behind a fold in the ground. New hull-down position. Wait. The 2nd Panther emerges from the fog, its crew aware from the burning vehicle ahead that something is wrong but uncertain where the threat is located. Leiper fires again. The round catches the 2nd Panther in the turret ring. The turret jams. The crew is wounded. The Panther becomes, in 1 second, a stationary target. Leiper moves. The pattern continues. Fire, move. Wait for the next Panther to come through the fog. Fire again. Move again. The 60 miles per hour that Bruce demanded is not what saves Leiper's platoon this morning. What saves them is the acceleration. The ability to be somewhere else in 20 seconds when the German gunners bring their turrets around and find nothing where the muzzle flash came from. In the first 25 minutes of the engagement, Leiper's platoon destroys 5 Panthers. They lose no vehicles. The battle continues for 11 days. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion across the full Haraucourt engagement will destroy 39 German armoured vehicles, Panthers, Panzer IVs, assault guns. The cost over 11 days will be 3 M18s destroyed and several damaged but repairable, 13 German vehicles for every Hellcat lost. The German crews at Haraucourt are not incompetent. They are inexperienced. Manteuffel knows this. He has told Berlin. His after-action report which will be recovered and translated by American intelligence after the war, notes that the Panzer Brigade formations committed to Lorraine were assembled too quickly, trained too briefly, and thrown into combat before they were ready. Manteuffel is not making excuses. He is describing what happened. The Panther is objectively a better armoured vehicle than the Hellcat. Better armour, better gun, better optics. In a duel at 1800 metres on a clear day, the Hellcat has no chance. But the duel at Aracourt is not at 1800 metres. It is at 150. At 150 yards, in fog, against crews who received their Panthers less than a month ago, the Hellcat's advantages, the ones the doctrine had insisted mattered, actually mattered. The ability to fire before being seen, the ability to move before being targeted, the ability to survive the engagement because the enemy's superior armour is meaningless when the enemy cannot bring his gun to bear before the Hellcat has already fired and disappeared. The fog was a coincidence. The green crews were a coincidence. The compressed engagement range was a coincidence. But the vehicle that exploited those coincidences was not a coincidence. It was the specific answer to a specific problem built by an automobile company in Michigan, operated by men who had been trained in exactly the tactics the terrain and the weather permitted them to use. Leslie McNair had been dead 8 weeks. Andrew Bruce was in Texas, 2,000 miles away. Neither of them saw Aracourt. Both of them, in the argument military historians would spend the next 50 years having, about what the Hellcat proved, were about to be quoted as if they had. 3 months from now, in another country, in another kind of battle, the Hellcat will be asked to do something it was never designed to do. Not 60 miles per hour on a fog-blind ridge, but 0 miles per hour in a snowbound field, holding a line that cannot move, against an enemy that will keep coming for 7 straight days. The town is called Bastogne, the date is Christmas, and the machine with paper armour is about to prove something the doctrine never accounted for. December 18th, 1944, evening, a field headquarters somewhere behind the Moselle River. A lieutenant colonel named Clifford D. Templeton, commanding officer of the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, is handed an order that will define the rest of his life. Move his battalion south, immediately. Report to 8th Corps at a Belgian road junction called Bastogne. Templeton is a career soldier. West Point graduate, regular army. He has been in the Tank Destroyer Force since it was created, and he has spent the last 3 months fighting in the Moselle sector with the confidence of a professional soldier who trusts his men and his equipment. The order in his hand tells him that trust is about to be tested in a way the doctrine never planned for. 2 days earlier, at 05:30, on the morning of December 16th, the German army launched its last major offensive on the Western Front. 28 divisions, 200,000 men, 250,000 rounds of artillery in the opening barrage. The offensive is aimed at Antwerp. The mechanism is the same one the Wehrmacht used in France in 1940. Fast-moving armoured penetration through the Ardennes forest, splitting the Allied line in two, driving to the Meuse River, and beyond it to the port that keeps the Anglo-American armies alive. At the centre of the German plan is a road junction. 7 roads converge on it. 7 roads that the German armour needs if it is going to keep moving west on Hitler's schedule. The junction is Bastogne. If the Germans take Bastogne, the entire southern Ardennes opens to them. If the Americans hold it, the German offensive slows, chokes, and eventually dies of its own fuel consumption. The 101st Airborne Division is already on the way, north from a rest area near Reims. Elite, well-led, experienced. But the 101st is a light infantry division. It has no tanks. Its anti-tank capability is limited to bazookas and a small number of towed guns. Templeton's Hellcats are the armour that will hold Bastogne, if they arrive in time. The 705th drives through the night of December 18th, then all day the 19th. Roads that were friendly territory 48 hours ago are now cut by German columns moving through the Ardennes. Templeton loses contact with parts of his battalion, regains it, loses it again. A detachment holding a critical junction has to fight its way through a German motorized column and does so without losing a vehicle. The rest of the battalion reaches Bastogne after dark on the night of December 19. The 101st is already digging in. Templeton reports to the airborne commander. His Hellcats are distributed around the perimeter. Hull down, camouflaged with white sheets and pine branches. Every position selected by a professional tank destroyer officer for maximum protection. And then, Templeton and his men do something that Andrew Bruce's doctrine never permitted. They stop moving. The whole doctrine, everything Camp Hood had taught, everything Aracourt had proven, was built around the idea that the Hellcat's survival depended on constant movement, fire and disappear, never occupy the same position twice. At Bastogne, the ground is frozen so hard the crews cannot dig fighting positions. Snow that falls at night both hides the vehicles and, when a Hellcat has to move, betrays every track. The tactical situation permits no repositioning. The men are told to hold what they have. The doctrine that killed Panthers at Aracourt is being set aside. The men who wrote it are not here to argue. December 20, the weather closes in, fog overcast, grounded aircraft. The 19th Tactical Air Command that saved the Third Army all summer cannot fly. Ammunition is not arriving, food is not arriving. Medical supplies are running low, the perimeter is closing. By December 21, Bastogne is surrounded. On December 22nd, a German officer under a white flag delivers a demand for surrender to the acting commander of the 101st, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe. McAuliffe's reply is one word long. It will pass into American military legend within 48 hours. Nuts, the perimeter holds. On December 23rd, the weather clears. The fighter bombers return. C-47 transports drop ammunition and medical supplies by parachute into the perimeter. The situation improves. The perimeter still holds. But the German commanders on the ground know that the window before Patton's Third Army reaches Bastogne from the south is closing. Every hour matters now, and on Christmas morning they make their last serious attempt. Christmas Day, 1944, 0700. Elements of the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division advance against the southwestern sector of the Bastogne perimeter. They are supported by Panzer IVs, with infantry riding on the hulls. The American unit in their path is the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment. The 327th has been fighting continuously since December 19. Its men have not slept, its ammunition is short, its officers are dead or wounded. The Panzer IVs penetrate the first line of the 327th's positions before American infantry with bazookas can stop them. The breach in the American line opens. At the breach, on Christmas morning, in snow that is coming down again after 2 clear days, the Hellcats of the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion are waiting. They are not moving. They are dug into positions selected 48 hours earlier, hull down. Guns already pointing at the approaches the German armour is now using. The crews inside them have not slept, either. They have been at their guns since the assault began at dawn. The first Panzer IV that appears through the falling snow is destroyed by a Hellcat, firing from a position the German tank commander did not know existed. The second Panzer IV is destroyed 30 seconds later by the same Hellcat, still in the same position, because the doctrine that would have required the vehicle to move has been overridden by the tactical situation and the ammunition supply and the frozen ground. The gunnery is what wins Christmas Day at Bastogne, not speed, not doctrine, skilled crews, firing accurately at multiple targets in rapid succession from positions that give them fields of fire the German attackers cannot fully account for. By the end of December 25, the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion has destroyed 27 German armoured vehicles. The cost is 6 Hellcats destroyed and several damaged. 4.5 German tanks for every Hellcat lost, lower than Aracourt, higher than almost any American defensive armoured engagement of the war. And accomplished, in every particular, by doing exactly what Andrew Bruce had said the vehicle should never do. On December 26, the day after Christmas, tanks from the 4th Armoured Division break through the German ring from the south. First Lieutenant Charles Boggess is the first American armour commander to make contact with the Bastogne defenders. The siege is broken. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion receives the Presidential Unit Citation for its performance during the siege of Bastogne. The citation praises the battalion's courage. It does not mention that the battalion won its citation by systematically ignoring the doctrine the Tank Destroyer Command had spent 3 years teaching. The war in Europe ends in May 1945. The Hellcat has by then become the most successful American armoured vehicle by the one measurement that armored combat ultimately produces. More enemy vehicles destroyed per friendly vehicle loss than any Sherman, any Wolverine, any Jackson. 2,507 Hellcats were built in total. Buick shut down the production line in October 1944, 4 months before the war ended, because the Army had determined that no more were needed. The vehicle that had achieved the highest kill ratio of the war had been produced in numbers smaller than a single week's Sherman output. In 1946, 12 months after VE Day, the United States Army made a decision about the future of the tank destroyer force. The decision was to end it. The Tank Destroyer Command was disbanded. The Camp Hood facility, where 100,000 Americans had trained in Bruce's doctrine, was renamed and repurposed. The idea of a separate, specialized anti-tank force was formally rejected in favor of integrating anti-tank capability into combined arms formations. The doctrine that had produced the highest kill ratio of the war was buried 12 months after the war ended. There would be no successor to the Hellcat. There would be no fast, lightly armored American vehicle designed for the same tactical concept ever again. The war had validated the machine, and the peace had rejected the philosophy that built it. Andrew Bruce lived until 1977. He was 83 years old when he died. In a memoir he wrote late in life, he addressed the argument about the tank destroyer doctrine directly. His conclusion, in the words those who knew him remembered, was that the doctrine had been correct in principle and wrong in application. That the vehicle had succeeded not because the theory was sound, but because the men who operated it were better than the theory required. "We were right," he said, "for the wrong reasons. The Hellcat did not stop being useful in 1946. The West German Army, the Bundeswehr, formed in 1955 as part of the NATO alliance that had replaced the wartime coalition. Its early armoured units, before West Germany began producing its own tanks, needed vehicles. The United States sold them Hellcats. For a decade, the same machine designed specifically to kill Panthers was operated by former Panther crews, now wearing the uniform of an American ally, defending West Germany against the possibility of Soviet armoured breakthrough. Taiwan received Hellcats. South Korea received Hellcats. Yugoslavia received Hellcats. The Yugoslav army kept M18s in operational service until the 1990s. When the Yugoslav Wars of Succession began, Hellcats built in Michigan in 1944 fought in the Balkans, 50 years after they had rolled off the Buick line. The speed record set in April 1943 at Aberdeen Proving Ground was not broken by any American armoured vehicle for the rest of the 20th century. The M1 Abrams that entered service in 1980, powered by a gas turbine engine producing more than 3 times the horsepower of the Wright R975, was governed to 45 miles per hour. Even without the governor, it could not match the Hellcat on a straight road. The M18 still holds the title of the fastest tracked armoured vehicle the United States Army has ever fielded. Everything from April 1943 onward was the Hellcat's era, 25 millimeters of armour, 60 miles per hour. The proposition that the second made the first sufficient, tested at Anzio and Normandy, and Aracourt and Bastogne, and answered in the affirmative, by a metric that the men who designed the vehicle had insisted was the only one that ultimately mattered. In 1985, a military historian named Christopher Gable completed a study at the Combat Studies Institute at Fort Leavenworth on the American tank destroyer program in the Second World War. Gable had access to sources the Wartime Tank Destroyer Command had not been able to consult: Bundesarchiv records, German after-action reports, cross-reference tallies of what German units had actually lost, on what days, at what locations. Gable's finding was that the kill claims filed by American tank destroyer battalions had been substantially higher than the German records could support. The wartime tallies were self-reported. Nobody had verified them against enemy loss data. Multiple American units had sometimes claimed the same destroyed Panther. Some claims had been optimistic. Some had been rounded up. Gable's adjusted figures reduced the Hellcat's kill ratio by roughly 30%. After the reduction, after every correction, after every claim that could not be verified was removed from the record, the Hellcat's kill ratio was still the highest of any American armoured vehicle in the European theatre. The truth, as sometimes happens, survived being edited. There is a Hellcat today, restored to running condition, at the National Armor and Cavalry Museum at Fort Moore, Georgia. Visitors can see it from a walkway. It is small for an armored vehicle, much smaller than the Shermans and Pershings around it. The 12.7 millimeters of side armor look, in person, like something a man could cut with a heavy knife. The vehicle was built by an automobile company that spent the previous 40 years making sedans for American doctors and dentists. It carried the same engine as a 1928 civilian airplane. It went to war with less armor than a car door. It came home holding the record no other American armored vehicle would ever take away from it. Not because the doctrine was right. Not because Andrew Bruce was right. Not because Leslie McNair, dead in a Normandy field in July 1944, had been right about anything except that armored breakthrough could be stopped by men who understood what they were doing and were given a machine that let them do it. The Hellcat came home with the record because Lieutenant Edwin Leiper knew where to place his platoon in the fog on September 19, 1944. Because Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Templeton knew how to hold a perimeter with vehicles that were never designed to hold perimeters. Because young men from Iowa and Newark and West Virginia and Brooklyn learned to operate a vehicle that had almost no armor and used it to destroy an army that had all the armor in the world. The number was 25 millimeters. The other number was 60 miles per hour. The number that mattered most in the end was neither of those. It was the number of men in the vehicles who understood what they were doing, and that number, the American Army has never learned to measure.